You are listening to Talking Africa, the podcast from the Africa Report that deconstructs the news from the continent. Welcome to the show. My name is Nick Norbrook. Some quick housekeeping. This is the last podcast of the year, but you can dry your eyes. We will be back in January, so stay tuned and stay up to date with all our news, analysis and feature stories. For more on that, go to theafricareport.com. Now, we have a great conversation for you today between our editor-in-chief, Patrick Smith, and the senior analyst for Ethiopia for the International Crisis Group, Will Davison. It was recorded just before Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia travelled to Stockholm to pick up his Nobel Peace Prize last week.
Well, we're here in Addis Ababa, and I'm with Will Davison, who is the Horn of Africa analyst for the International Crisis Group, based in Brussels. But Will spends a lot of his time here in Addis Ababa, having previously been based here as a Bloomberg News correspondent, and has a particularly deep understanding of the reform process going on. And I really wanted to start the conversation today with the news that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is going to pick up his Nobel Prize this weekend. And there's been a bit of a furore about the length of time he's spending meeting with the Nobel laureate, the Nobel Prize Committee, talking or not talking to the foreign media while he's there. And it seems to me it sort of fits into a pattern of the outside world, while hailing what Abiy Ahmed has done in Ethiopia, doesn't really understand a lot of the complexities and the massive challenges that he's up against. They've given him a prize, but the job is, nowhere near done. There's a huge list of things he has to do in the next year. I wonder if you could get into that, Will.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Patrick. Just to state, you gave me a slight upgrade, a slight promotion there in terms of my role. So I'm the senior analyst for Ethiopia for the International Crisis Group. Yes, I think the Nobel, the situation around the Nobel ceremony is as you describe, in terms of perhaps exposing some of the complications of Ethiopia's political situation and the transition. I think if we go back to when the Nobel Committee announced the award, obviously it was primarily because of the peacemaking activity by Prime Minister Abiy with regards to Eritrea. But also they made clear that this was an award which they hoped would encourage Abiy to go on to greater things. And I think that is the way that we really should be looking at this. Some initial achievements have been made, but as you suggest, there is an awful lot of work to do. Now, when we look at more specifically about the situation in Norway next week, I mean, I will be blunt. I don't think it's a good decision by the Prime Minister and his team to avoid the press in this manner. I think we all understand the difficulties that the media pose politicians across the world, but that is the job of the media. If there were particular concerns, then that's something I think that the Prime Minister's team should have managed. Whether it would have been better for the Prime Minister to speak in Amharic, could a translation have become available? I think there's ways that this could have been managed which wouldn't have shifted the focus away from the Nobel Prize itself, and therefore the achievements that the Prime Minister is being recognised for. There's no shame whatsoever in this being an unfinished business for Prime Minister Abiy and his political allies and supporters. Anyone who thought that Ethiopia was going to be transformed into this liberal democracy that is that people are aspiring for. Anyone who thought that was going to occur within the space of 18 months was simply not being realistic. What I would like to see is everyone being a bit more realistic about the situation in Ethiopia, whether that's the administration itself fronting up the problems, seeking support from international and domestic partners, whether it's international partners being a bit more realistic about the challenges, and that involves an upfront, thorough conversation about the political realities in Ethiopia. And it doesn't look like we're going to get that next week in Oslo.
Right. Well, thanks for your frankness on that, Will. A couple of weeks ago, we had this referendum in Sidama. And as we know in Europe, referendum rarely go according to plan and can create huge problems, greater problems than they were trying to solve often. The Sidama referendum, by all accounts, was a success in the sense that they got a very clear decision. I think 98% of people wanted a new state, a new region carved out of the existing federal system. So where do we go from here? What is the process to setting up this new region? How long is it going to take? And I guess the other issue is it going to encourage the others? And people say there are another 10 regions or 10 areas demanding regional status. Is it going to just sort of like increase the number of states, or do you think somehow the government will try and put a lid on it all?
Yeah, thanks. Excuse me if I steer well clear of discussing any sort of particular European referendum situations, but I'm happy to talk about the Ethiopian one. So just first of all, one thing I noted there, you said the referendum was a success. Now, on its own terms, with what occurred on November the 20th, and the immediate preparation for that, we can all agree, I think, by and large. But we have to look at a slightly longer build-up to it, and it involved this violence in July relating to controversies around the referendum, which left something around 50 people dead. Right?
Now that was directly linked to the preparations for the referendum, was it?
Yes, very much so. But just to say that's clearly not a success, and I think we have to see it in that context. But yes, so the July violence, essentially what occurred is that the Sidama autonomy campaign, the statehood campaign, started gathering momentum last year after Prime Minister Abiy came to power, and there's this sense of political openness and opportunity. They did what they needed to do as an ethnic community, an ethnic administrative community, to request a referendum, and then the authorities basically sat on their hands. Now, that went on for many months, various reasons given, electoral board reform, some of the potential complications you refer to in southern Ethiopia, undoubtedly partly responsible. The response from the Sidama to this was saying that we will unilaterally self-declare a region ourselves because the authorities have not kept up their side of the bargain in terms of the constitutional obligations to hold a referendum. It was controversy and decisions and confusion around that self-declaration plan, which pretty much led to the violence. What this means is that the electoral board announced very late that a referendum would be held within 5 months. Technically, that was extending the constitutional deadline to hold the referendum. There was a sort of split in the Sidama movement. Politicians, activists, academics, street protesters, regular people. There was a split in that movement about what to do, whether to proceed with a self-referendum or whether to wait for the delayed referendum to be held. It was in that controversy and confusion, clashes with security forces, Sidama groups attacking local minorities, the authorities responding with the use of lethal force and also widespread arrests. So it's a very, very messy and tragic situation. And then we did proceed with the referendum. To broaden out a little bit, I mentioned that the Sidama autonomy campaign, the successful autonomy campaign so far, was a result of political openness that we've seen under Abiy. And this really is the clearest and cleanest examples of the political dilemmas that have been created. So what's happened in the past year? We've seen a power shift within the ruling coalition from the Tigray, the TPLF, to the other parties in Amhara and Oromia. We've seen the accompanying release of political prisoners, the promise of democratic elections, the deal with Eritrea and all this type of thing. But it's very hard to manage this kind of process, right? Once you have opened things up, once you've allowed the opportunity for people to campaign and to organise into interest groups, then you're giving everyone that opportunity. Yeah. One of those who took that opportunity in the most assertive fashion has been the Sidama community.
Right.
They've been pushing for this type of arrangement to have a regional state. So in line with other populations, comparable populations in Ethiopia, populations like the Tigray or the Somali or the Afar, they have their regional state. Why don't we have one?
Right.
The reason that they haven't had one is largely due to the political management of the ruling coalition, whether in terms of offering incentives and disincentives, or whether in terms of more coercive action. You know, the EPRDF has kept a lid on this autonomy demand. Yeah. With the EPRDF loosening, with the power shifting within the EPRDF, with the process of political liberalisation, the EPRDF was essentially no longer able to contain this Sidama demand. And so that's what's happened. The issue with this is that the Sidama demand means the creation of another ethnically defined federal region.
Right.
That isn't something...
It's taking it up to 10, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it'll be the 10th adding to the 9 listed in the Constitution. Again, fine on the Sidama terms, fine for those people who value the Constitution and the ethnic federal settlement and ethno-regional autonomy. For those who see the demise of the TPLF as the end of ethnic federalism, perhaps including some people supportive and close to the Prime Minister, the creation of another ethnically defined state is not ideal. Right. The other issue is that this collapse in the authority of the EPRDF, and more specifically its southern wing, as you said, it opens up the door not just to the Sidama, but to other ethnic administrative communities in the south who want to upgrade their administrative status to a region. And the issue there is pushing against the constitution, which is explicitly designed to encourage self-determination.
Right. That's built into it, isn't it?
It's not just built into it. It's sort of actively encouraged by
that you can actually.
Very much so. Yeah. Article 4. So it's actively encouraged. I mean, the principle of the constitution is to allow Ethiopia's nations, nationalities, and peoples to express themselves, to self-determine themselves in whatever they want as a response to past coercion. The way that was countered was through EPRDF political management and EPRDF control. So with EPRDF control gone, how do you control these sorts of processes? Where we are now is that it looks pretty unlikely that the government is going to bless the conversion of the southern nations region into 11 different regions. So the question is, how do you bargain with these different groups to get them to accept some other form of administrative arrangement, perhaps answering some of their grievances over representation or economic justice in other ways. But it's very much an unfolding situation. The Sidama referendum is an important precedent. It gives them great mobilizing, campaigning leverage, perhaps on the government's, or for those who would like to see this situation sort of be controlled, and so that for not to be a wholesale fragmentation. The Sidama are the largest population. They're the most organised. They've campaigned for the longest. They've got the biggest history of autonomy. Well, that's contestable. But they have the point is, are the other zones, Walaita, Goragi, Hadia, Kaffa, and a bunch of others, Gamo, Gofa, are they similarly united and organised, and do they have the ability to mobilise and pressure the system as the Sidama?
Right.
Perhaps not, but we're yet to see.
Okay, so we've got this. You painted this picture of sort of two contrary forces. You know, the sort of centrifugal one of the ethnic federal system, the rights of the ethnic groups within that to push for autonomy from the centre and beyond that. But at the same time, there's a lot of talk in Addis Ababa and elsewhere about a new national entity, new national political entity, the Prosperity Party, launched by the Prime Minister around his... it seems the ruling ideology he's pushing behind this party is this idea of Medema, synergy idea, and so forth. So how is that going?